Clara Mercer stood on the boardwalk, the wind pulling at the fine wool of her coat. This was Hope's Creek. It was supposed to be a new beginning, an inheritance, a future. But the letter in her hand, clutched in her glove, was a lie. The shop that was supposed to be hers was a hollow, sun-bleached shell, its windows boarded over like dead eyes. The lawyer who had sent for her was gone, vanished, and the few faces that passed her in the dust were cold, indifferent, or worse. Curious, she was a city girl braving the wilds, 1,000 miles from anything she had ever known, with nothing but a worthless piece of paper and a trunk full of clothes she couldn't sell. As the sun began to bleed out behind the jagged mountains, the raw, unforgiving chill of a frontier winter began to bite. She was vulnerable, and every person in this town knew it. Clara Mercer is penniless, freezing, and trapped in a town that doesn't want her. Her story of survival, redemption, and love is just beginning. But before we find out what happens to her, welcome to Frontier Rescue Stories. If you love tales of the Old West where courage is tested and hearts are healed, you have found your home. Help our community grow by taking a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell. Your support helps us reach a larger audience and bring more stories like this to life. And we love to know where our stories are traveling. So let us know in the comments, from which part of the world are you watching this story today? Now, let's return to Hope's Creek as the first hard snowflakes of the storm begin to fall. The cold was a physical thing, a predator. Clara Mercer, raised in the civilized, gas-lit parlors of Boston, had never known a cold like this. It didn't just chill the skin. It seemed to seek out the bone. She pulled her shawl tighter, a useless gesture. The shop, her inheritance, was a fraud. The letter from a Mr. Bartholomew Finch promising a thriving mercantile business left by a distant, forgotten uncle had been a cruel and elaborate trap. She had spent the last of her savings on the train ticket and the stagecoach chasing a dream. Now that dream was a pile of dust and splinters. Her first stop had been the land office. The clerk, a man with a stained vest, had barely looked up. "Finch?" he'd grunted. "Oh, he's got an office. Top floor of the saloon. But that property. That was sold off months ago to pay taxes." He finally raised his eyes, and Clara saw the pity in them, which was worse than the scorn. "You're not the first, ma'am. Finch has a way of acquiring things." Her second stop was the saloon, a place she never would have entered in her old life. The smell of stale whiskey and unwashed men hit her like a physical blow. She found Finch's office. He was a large man, impeccably dressed, a diamond pin in his cravat. He represented the corrupt banker archetype, a man who held the town in his financial grip. He smiled when she showed him the letter. It was a smile without warmth. "My dear Miss Mercer," he said, spreading his hands. "A terrible misunderstanding. A clerical error. The property was sadly insolvent, but you are here, a beautiful woman, alone." His gaze traveled over her, and Clara felt a chill far deeper than the wind outside. He was a predator, and she was seen as more vulnerable. "Perhaps," he'd continued, "we can come to an arrangement. I might be able to find you employment." Clara had fled, his soft laughter following her down the stairs. She knew what kind of employment he meant. She was a strong-willed woman, but this was a lawless frontier, and she was utterly alone. Her third stop was the boarding house. The landlady took one look at her fine but travel-worn dress and her single trunk. "No room," she said before Clara could even speak, and shut the door. The church, her last hope, was dark. The door was locked. This was the moment of absolute rejection, the kind that defined life on the frontier. There was no safety net. Now there was nowhere left to go. The sun was gone. The wind howled, driving needle-sharp ice that stung her cheeks. She was labeled unwanted. She sank onto a bench, right outside the very shop she thought she owned, and pulled her trunk close. This was it. This was where her journey ended. She was going to freeze to death. Across the street, inside the warm light of the general store, a man watched her. His name was Silas Cole. The townsfolk knew him, but they didn't know him. He was the mysterious, silent stranger, the reclusive rancher. He came to town twice a month for supplies, spoke in one-word answers, and paid in cash. They whispered about him. They said he was a disgraced lawman, that he had a dark past. They pointed to the network of scars that pulled at the left side of his face and the permanent, stiff limp in his right leg. He was a lone figure, a man who had walled himself off from the world, nursing his own wounds. He saw Clara. He had seen her earlier, arguing with Finch. He knew Finch's type. He knew what she was, a fool, a lamb walking into a wolf's den. It was not his concern. He had learned, the hard way, what happened when he made other people's problems his own. He paid for his flour and salt, shouldered his bag, and stepped out into the blizzard. He walked past her, his head down, his limp pronounced in the gathering snow. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He was halfway to his wagon when a sound, thin and sharp, cut through the wind. A cough. It was a ragged, desperate sound. He stopped. He closed his eyes, his scarred hand clenching on his sack. He was a man running from his past, a man defined by a single terrible failure. He had failed to protect, and the cost had been everything. He stood there for a full minute, the snow crusting on his hat. Cursing himself, cursing the world, he turned around. Clara was barely conscious. The cold was a heavy, sleepy blanket. She was shivering so violently she could no longer feel her feet. She was, in this moment, the damsel in distress, a fate she had never imagined. She was so cold, she didn't even register the dark figure standing over her, blocking out the swirling snow. A shadow, a ghost. Then the shadow spoke. "You'll die here." The voice was a low rumble, rough as gravel. Clara's eyes fluttered open. The dark figure was a man, tall and broad, covered in snow. She could barely make out the scarred planes of his face in the gloom. It was the man from the store. The man everyone whispered about. She tried to answer, but her lips were numb. I have—" "You have nothing." He cut her off, his voice devoid of pity. It was a simple statement of fact. He offered no promises, no soft words. He looked at her, then at the trunk. "I have a ranch. It's a day's ride. You can work, or you can freeze." It wasn't a rescue. It was a grim, practical offer. It was a choice between two unknowns. But one was death. She gave a small, jerky nod. Silas Cole didn't offer his hand. He didn't carry her. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron, and hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, her legs useless. With an impatient grunt, he half-dragged, half-carried her to his buckboard, lifting her onto the seat. He grabbed her trunk, the thing that held her entire former life, and threw it in the back with the sacks of flour and salt. He untied the horses, climbed up beside her, and wrapped a thick, rough wool blanket around her. It smelled of hay and leather. "Don't fall out," he said, and with a crack of the reins, the wagon lurched into the teeth of the blizzard. The journey was a frozen hell. Life on the frontier was harsh, and this storm was a blizzard of legendary proportions. The wind was a physical wall screaming in their ears. The world vanished into a blinding curtain of white. Clara could only huddle under the blanket, shivering, sure that they were lost, that they would simply circle until they froze. But Silas was a creature of this unforgiving land. He drove on with a grim, silent determination. He seemed to navigate by instinct, his scarred face set, his eyes narrowed against the ice. He was the rugged cowboy, a man who knew how to survive. They rode for hours, in a silence broken only by the howl of the wind and the jingle of the harness. Clara, exhausted and terrified, finally drifted into a painful, shivering unconsciousness. She woke to stillness. The wagon had stopped. The wind was still there, but it was muffled. She was being lifted. This time he carried her. He swung her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing and strode through thigh-deep snow toward a low, dark shape. A rustic cabin. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The cabin was a single large room, dark and cold, though a fire smoldered in a large stone hearth at one end. He deposited her on a simple wooden chair by the cold embers, not gently. "Don't touch the fire," he commanded. He moved with purpose, his limp more pronounced in the small space. He stoked the embers, added kindling, and soon a small fire was crackling, throwing weak light on the room. It was a man's room, sparse and neglected. Dust lay thick on a shelf of books. A rifle was mounted over the mantel. There was a table, another chair, and a bed in the far corner. It was a remote ranch, a place of self-imposed exile. He went to a cupboard, poured something from a tin into a mug of hot water, and pushed it into her hands. It was bitter tea. "Drink." She drank, the hot liquid burning a path down to her frozen core. Her hands were shaking so hard she spilled most of it. Silas watched her, his expression unreadable. "The storm will last for days," he said, his voice flat. "This is the arrangement. There is a small room back there." He nodded toward a curtain in the corner. "You will sleep there. You will cook. You will clean. You will mend my clothes. You will earn your keep. When the thaw comes, I will take you back to Hope's Creek. Understood?" It was a contract, a way for him to offer shelter, safety, without compromising his isolation, and a way for her to accept it without sacrificing the last of her dignity. She was not a guest. She was an employee. "I understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Good." He turned, grabbed the heavy blanket from the wagon, and tossed it at her. "Don't light a fire I haven't set. Don't go outside. The storm will kill you." He picked up a lantern, went to the main door, and shrugged on a heavy coat. "Where are you going?" she asked, panicked at the thought of being left alone. "Barn," he said. "Horses." He stepped out into the blizzard, and the door slammed shut, leaving Clara Mercer alone in the silent, shadow-filled cabin. She was safe from the storm, but she had traded one prison for another. The first few days were defined by silence. The blizzard raged outside, a white, roaring monster that sealed the rustic cabin from the rest of the world. Inside, the silence was just as dense. Silas Cole was a ghost in his own home. He would leave before dawn to tend his stock, his limp echoing on the floorboards, and return after dark, covered in snow, to sit by the fire and clean his tack or read. He rarely spoke. Clara, a strong-willed woman, was not one to be idle. She took his arrangement seriously. She was a guest of circumstance, but she would be a worker by choice. And the cabin needed work. It was the physical manifestation of a grief-worn man. Dust was everywhere. The pantry was a chaotic mess of tins and sacks. His clothes were piled in a corner, buttons missing, seams torn, so she began to navigate the chaos. She started to fix things. She aired out the damp linens. She scrubbed the floor. She organized the pantry, her city girl sensibilities finding comfort in creating order. She found a forgotten bag of beans and a side of bacon, and when Silas returned on the third night, the cabin wasn't just warm. It smelled of food. Real food. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. He looked at the bubbling pot, then at her. He said nothing, but he ate 2 full bowls. This became their slow-burn romance, a romance in the Wild West, built not on words, but on actions. It was a relationship that grew through shared glances, long silences, and acts of quiet care. She would find a stack of freshly cut firewood left by her door every morning, more than she needed for the kitchen stove. He would find his favorite shirt, the one with the torn cuff, mended with stitches so fine they were almost invisible. She was rebuilding what's broken, and she didn't just mean the cabin. The state of the ranch was a metaphor for the state of the man. As Clara cleaned away the dust and neglect, she was, figuratively, healing him. One night, the storm had finally broken. The silence in the cabin felt different, thicker. Silas was staring into the fire, his scarred hand clenching and unclenching. "You should not have come west," he said, his voice quiet. "I had no choice," Clara replied, darning one of his socks. "My father died. There was nothing left." She told him about the letters from Finch, the promise of the shop. "I suppose I was a fool to believe in such a thing." Finch, Silas spat the name. "He feeds on the hopeful, like a vulture. And you?" Clara asked gently. "What do you feed on, Silas? Or what feeds on you?" He was silent for a long time. The fire crackled. He finally turned to her, and the firelight illuminated the deep, grief-worn lines in his face. "This," he said, touching the scar on his cheek. "This was a gift. From a man I failed to stop," he told her. He had been a U.S. Marshal. He'd had a wife, a daughter. He was in a bank in Laramie when a gang tried to rob it. They'd taken hostages, including his family. Silas, the disgraced lawman, had hesitated. He'd tried to talk them down. The leader got spooked. The shooting started. His wife and daughter died. He'd killed the men, but not before one of them gave him the scars and the limp as a permanent reminder of his failure. He had failed to protect. He'd turned in his badge, left his life, and come to this remote ranch to disappear. He was a man on a redemption arc who didn't believe he could be redeemed. "So you see," he finished, his voice hollow. "I am not a guardian, Miss Mercer. I am a failure." Clara put down the sock. She looked at this broken, reclusive rancher, this man who had saved her from the storm. "You did not fail me, Mr. Cole," she said softly. They were two souls healing together, two people defined by loss, finding a found family in the most unexpected of places. Later that week, Clara was unpacking the last of her trunk. At the bottom was a small rosewood music box, its inlay cracked. It was the last thing her mother had given her. She wound the key, but the mechanism was broken. It produced only a dull metallic click. Silas, watching from the doorway, wordlessly held out his hand. Clara, surprised, gave it to him. He sat at the table. For an hour, with his large, calloused, scarred hands, he gently, patiently worked on the tiny, delicate mechanism. His hands, which he saw as instruments of failure, were surprisingly deft. And then a tiny, tinny sound filled the cabin. A simple melody, the first music that house had heard in years. It was a quiet miracle. The thaw came as Silas had promised. The world emerged from its white tomb, replaced by thick mud and the smell of pine. The sanctuary Silas had built felt different. It felt like a home. The slow-burn romance had taken root. They worked together now, mending a section of fence, planting a small, hopeful garden with the seeds Clara had found in the pantry. They had built a quiet partnership, one of deep trust and earned respect. But the world outside the ranch had not forgotten them. One afternoon, Clara was outside, hanging laundry, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. It wasn't Silas. He was on the far ridge checking traps. 3 riders appeared. Leading them was Bartholomew Finch. He rode into the yard as if he owned it, his eyes taking in the repaired fences, the clean porch, and Clara. His lip curled in a sneer. He had come to confront them. "Well, well," Finch called out, dismounting. "Miss Mercer, you have landed on your feet, or perhaps on your back." Clara felt a hot flash of anger. "You are not welcome here, Mr. Finch. This is Cole's land, isn't it?" Finch laughed. "I'm here to see him. About a debt." "I have no debt with you," Clara said, standing her ground. She was no longer the damsel in distress. She was a strong-willed woman. "Oh, but you do," Finch said, stepping onto the porch. "You came to Hope's Creek under false pretenses. You have no funds. You are a vagrant. The town council, of which I am the head, has declared you so. Your debt is to me, for the trouble you've caused." "That's absurd," Clara said, but her heart was pounding. This was the lawlessness of the frontier. "And now," Finch continued, his voice dropping, "you are squatting on this land I have had my eye on for some time. Cole's water rights are valuable. Get off this ranch." The voice came from behind them. Silas was there, standing by the barn, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He was no longer the reclusive rancher. He was the former lawman, and his eyes were cold as ice. Finch smiled. "Cole, the hero of Laramie, or is it the butcher? I get the stories mixed up. This was the showdown." Finch had invaded their home, their sanctuary, to threaten not just a person, but the new life they had both built. "Finch," Silas said, his voice deadly calm. "Leave now." "I don't think so," Finch said. One of his men, a rough-looking man with a branding iron scar, suddenly grabbed Clara's arm. "Silas!" she cried out. Something in Silas broke. The lone figure who had refused to get involved, who was defined by hesitation, moved. He didn't hesitate. He didn't bargain. He raised the rifle in one smooth motion. "Take your hand off her." The man froze. He looked at Finch. Finch, realizing he had miscalculated, raised his hands. "Easy, Marshal. We're just talking business. She has no business with you," Silas said, stepping forward, placing himself between Finch and Clara. He was no longer hiding. He was reclaiming his honor. He was a protector. "This is a mistake, Cole," Finch hissed, his mask of civility gone. "This land, this woman, they're complications I will not tolerate. You have 24 hours. I want her on the stagecoach, out of this territory. And you will sign over your deed to me for a generous price, to cover her debts. And if I don't?" Silas asked. Finch smiled, a terrible thin smile. He nodded to his other man, who was still on his horse. The man struck a match, lit the end of a torch, and tossed it onto the new fence line Silas and Clara had just finished building. The dry wood caught instantly. "Fire is a terrible thing, isn't it, Cole?" Finch sneered. It takes everything. The threat was clear, alluding to the very fire that had scarred Silas and destroyed his life. Have her on that stagecoach by morning, Finch commanded, climbing back on his horse. Or I'll be back with fire. And this time, Cole, there will be no one left to bury. The fire on the fence sputtered and died in the damp wood, but Finch's threat hung in the air, thick as smoke. Clara was shaking, but with rage, not fear. He can't do this. He can't just take... He can, Silas said, his voice grim. He was staring at the smoking fence post, but he was seeing another fire years ago. He's the law in Hope's Creek. Then we have to go around the law, Clara said, her mind, trained in the city, working fast. She was not a passive damsel. He scammed me, Silas. He must have scammed others. A man that corrupt, that greedy. He would keep records. A ledger. Silas looked at her. His office. At the saloon. It's a suicide mission, Silas said. It's the only way, Clara insisted. You're a lawman. You know how to do this. But you can't shoot your way to justice. Not this time. This isn't a showdown. This is about honor, Your Honor. He saw the resilience in her eyes, the strength he had come to rely on. She was right. His redemption arc couldn't be won with a gun. It had to be won with his intellect. The plan was dangerous. They rode to town that night under the cover of darkness. Silas, the former lawman, knew Finch's habits. He plays poker at the saloon from 9 until midnight. But they needed a distraction. A prairie fire, Silas mused. But a small one. He set a controlled fire in the livery stable's hayloft, a separate building owned by Finch himself. As the town bell rang and men shouted, "Fire!" Finch and his men ran from the saloon. In the chaos, Silas and Clara slipped up the back stairs to Finch's office. It was locked. Silas, his old skills returning, picked the lock in seconds. The office was dark. "Look for a ledger," Clara whispered, striking a match. He'd keep it in a safe. They found it behind a large painting. "I can't open that," Silas said. "You don't have to," Clara said. She ran her fingers over the frame of the painting. "My father was a banker. He always said, the laziest men hide things in the most obvious places." She pulled, a false back on the painting itself, and inside, not the safe, was a thin black ledger. She opened it. The match flickered. Her finger ran down the page. "There, my uncle's name and..." "Sold, taxes, and here, acquired, and another name, and another." It was all there. The complicated inheritance scam. "He had cheated dozens. We have it," she breathed. "Clara." Silas's voice was tense. "We've got company." The door burst open. It wasn't Finch. It was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a U.S. Marshal badge on his chest. "Hold right there." "Thank God," Clara said. "Marshal, this man, Finch." "Finch is the one who sent me," the Marshal said, his eyes hard. "Said he had squatters," said the disgraced Marshal Cole was... "Then read this," Silas said, not moving. He tossed the ledger onto the desk. "Read it before you take his word. I was a lawman. I know the rules. But that book, that's the truth." The Marshal, intrigued, picked up the book. He lit a lamp. He read, and he read. His expression turned from suspicion to cold fury. The redemption was public. The Marshal, with Silas and Clara beside him, walked into the saloon where Finch had just returned from the fire. He slapped the ledger down on the poker table. "Bartholomew Finch," the Marshal's voice boomed. "You're under arrest. For fraud, theft, and conspiracy." Finch's face went white. The entire town watched as the man who had owned them was put in irons. They looked at Finch, and then they looked at Silas Cole, not as an outcast, but as the man who had finally brought them justice. Silas and Clara rode back to the ranch as the sun came up. They didn't speak. When they got to the cabin, the repaired home, they stood on the porch. "Your inheritance," Silas said quietly. Clara looked at him. "The shop was never my inheritance," she said. "This is." She gestured to the land, the cabin, the new life. "It's not much," Silas said. "It's everything," she replied. "We are two souls healing together." Silas looked at his scarred hands, the ones that had failed him, the ones that had fixed a music box. He reached out and, for the first time, took her hand. It wasn't a passionate embrace. It was something more. It was the slow, deliberate work of two broken people finding their redemption. Video ends on a still, painted image of the cabin, now with a small garden, the sun rising over the mountains. The colors are warm and hopeful. Narrator. And so, in the quiet of the high plains, Clara and Silas found their true inheritance. Not in land or money, but in each other. A testament to resilience, courage, and the redemptive power of love. Thank you for joining us for this story at Frontier Rescue Stories. If you enjoyed the story of Silas and Clara's survival and redemption, please help our channel grow by hitting that like button, sharing the video with someone who loves a good Western, and subscribing for more stories every week. We have a whole playlist of Frontier Rescue Stories just like this one, filled with tales of courage and hope in the Old West. Click here to check it out. We love to hear from you, so let us know in the comments below. What was your favorite part of their story? Was it the moment Silas offered his help or the quiet healing in the cabin? And what kind of rescue story would you like to see next? Your suggestions help us create the tales you want to hear. Thank you for watching. From all of us at Frontier Rescue Stories, we wish you all the best. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next story.